from America to India, how this shift has been for you.
I will give two tips of my own and one tip that I was given. Take responsibility for what happens to you.
What kind of research we are expecting now or maybe post-COVID scenarios in organizations?
I really like the camaraderie among the students. There aren't mileposts, there aren't benchmarks that have to be met.
Hi everyone, my name is Anita and I welcome you all on Intercultural Media once again. So today I'm going to be with Professor Allan, who is currently working with the Goa Institute of Management. He's a PhD in Organizational Studies from University of Oregon, USA, and MA in International Studies, International Business from Sophia University, Japan. Join me to welcome Professor Allan. Thank you so much, Professor. I'm very happy to have you on Intercultural Media.
No, it's my pleasure to join you.
So you are working with the Goa Institute of Management right now. So my first question, which is an obvious question, how are you finding this place? You came from America and working here. So how your journey has been so far? Please tell me about it. And it is very interesting to see your work. I'll come to your research work eventually, but I really want to know from America to India, how this shift has been for you.
Well, that's a great question and one that I have reflected on for a while. I have had I would say a lengthy and a fruitful career, but I had reached a point, and particularly with the pandemic, where I felt like I needed to seek out a new adventure, to seek out new experiences, new stimulus, if you will. And so I counseled with my wife, and we thought rather than move to yet another location somewhere in North America, we ought to venture beyond the borders. We had done so earlier in my career when we lived in Japan, and indeed 3 of our children were born there. We thought it would be interesting to have an international experience without the children a little bit later in life, where we had some opportunities to do some other things. And then professionally, I was impressed by what GIM was doing, and I also thought that I had some things that I could contribute to that effort, and so it was an attractive move. Since arriving here, I arrived at the end of May in 2021. I've had a really positive experience. I'm falling in love with Goa. It is a marvelous place to be, and I enjoy working with my colleagues and with the students here. And along the way, of course, there's been a lot of learning, because things on the surface appear to be similar, but are quite different from university systems in the U.S.
So you are into leadership research and management research. So tell me more about your professional experience before you entered in academic stream. So tell me about it, how it evolved.
Sure. I should say, first of all, I grew up in the home of an educator. My father was a middle school and an elementary school principal, and my mother worked in education as well. And so I grew up around learning a lot, and so I always had an interest in that. But as I graduated from university, I moved to Japan to do graduate study, and at that time I started working with a cross-cultural and language training company. And in that work, I worked with a lot of what are called the first rank of the Tokyo Stock Exchange companies. And that'd be kind of like in the US, the Fortune 500 or the Business Week 1000. These were some of the top companies, and my job was program director. I was responsible for overseeing a staff of about 50 trainers and assessors. And we traveled all over Japan working with companies and doing that training. And I got an up-close view of what the challenges are like working with people from different countries and cultures. Much of our work at the time was involved with helping Japanese companies. This was the late 70s, early 80s. They were expanding rapidly overseas and struggling to understand how to do business and how to work with people in different countries.
Okay.
And that was a marvelous experience and indeed piqued a lot of my interest. As fate would have it, I ended up moving from that company and went to work at a research center. Interestingly enough, I was hired originally I was originally interviewed to do translation work, to translate various documents and training materials that they had into English. But when they heard about my background, they asked me if I would rather work on the research side. And so that began a path where I started studying and doing research with Japanese colleagues. And my interest from the outset was very much what was happening at the top of the organization. And so that was kind of an early precursor to studying leadership. It wasn't until several years later, though, that I really began to focus on leadership per se as a topic.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So I actually checked saw your Google Scholar citations, more than 8,200. Very inspiring to see that kind of impact you have created in terms of research so far. What is that innate feeling which you have to sustain in this journey?
That's a good word, innate. I think from certainly from early in my life, I have been interested in ideas and interested in I would say why things are the way they are. I have always enjoyed observing people trying to make sense of what they're doing. In addition to that, I would say I have generally a contrarian approach to the world. When everybody is saying, "Isn't this wonderful?" I start asking, "What's wrong with this?" Or what if we think about this differently? And so I think I have a natural tendency as I look with ideas, as I explore ideas, to try to understand what's going on underneath, and I think that's really what drives me. I find I'm interested in lots of different ideas, but some more than others, and particularly ideas about how people who are different work with one another. I think that is certainly in this age of a global economy, that is a significant question we all have to wrestle with.
Okay. Okay, so I can see that your research and your books are bringing various perspectives, leadership perspectives from various cultures. So any key incident which you remember, which changed your way of thinking?
It's an interesting question because there have been a couple of occasions over the course of my career where I really have, I wouldn't say so much changed focus, but clarified my focus in what I've been interested in. My early work was mostly around Japanese organizations, and particularly how Japanese companies would transfer their human resource management practices to their overseas subsidiaries. And I found that work fascinating because it is a significant challenge to make those adjustments, to take the things that you do and move them to a new context where people have different ways of doing things. Sometimes those ways have legal implications. Sometimes, almost always, they have cultural implications. And those are significant challenges. So I was interested in that, but I would say about 22, 23 years ago, I started to recognize that while my focus had been on organizational issues and challenges, I thought the more interesting ones and perhaps the more impactful ones were at the individual level. And so that's when I shifted and began really to focus on intercultural issues. Um, and that's been much of my study, which I think evolved into a focus on global leadership, because so much of what global leaders are doing is really, whether they appreciate it or not, is really having impact at the individual level, certainly on themselves as leaders, but also on those that they lead. And then more recently, as I have looked at the rise of issues around diversity and inclusion and equity, I've come to appreciate that on the surface, though the issues with what I'll call DEI and intercultural appear similar, there are some fundamental differences. And I felt like the intercultural perspective that I've developed works well and has something to contribute there. And that has led to my interest in inclusion.
Okay. Okay.
And that's where I currently have a lot of my focus.
Okay.
And I think that's significant. Coming to India was an opportunity to kind of separate from an American lens and an American focus, and recognize that there are other approaches, other aspects, other issues related to that I needed to better understand. And so this has been really a stimulating time for me as I come to grapple with those issues.
Yeah, a lot is changing in Indian scenario as well in terms of diversity and inclusion. So I think these companies, organizations are focusing a lot in DEI sectors and frameworks as well. My next question to you will be more towards the scenario which we are in, where you came to India during COVID times, and everything changed from work from home perspective to different aspects around working and functioning in the organizations. I want to ask you, because you are having this authority to speak in terms of leadership or HRM or different organizational perspectives. Tell me what kind of research we are expecting now, or maybe post-COVID scenarios in organizations. What kind of work a researcher should do now? Because it has evolved and we do not have literature per se. What are your suggestions, or what can be possible 3 topics or areas wherein scholars should focus now?
Yeah. That is such an interesting question. I was asked to write an essay about the impact of COVID 2 years ago, within months of when things were happening. This would have been about April 2020, and at the time, my reaction was, we don't know whether this is a temporary shock or something that's longer term. And so it's difficult to foresee, but I think we are far enough into this to understand that there have been some, I would say, some tectonic shifts in where we're at, and it looks like those are likely to be fairly durable. One of the areas where I think there's going to be a lot of research, I can already see things coming out, and in talking with colleagues in Europe and actually more recently in Latin America. And there was an emerging interest before COVID, but I think it has ramped up significantly, is the nature of digital work and digital cultures.
Right.
We have, I would say, we have a generation of people now who work almost exclusively virtually. They don't go to the office. They don't meet people in person. And this is a fundamentally different culture. What COVID did is give many of us much more of that experience, and in some cases a short-term experience. But there's a lot that we need to understand about the implications of this in terms of human interactions, in terms of how you lead people and motivate people. Some of the most basic questions I think are likely to be of concern. A second one that I think has emerged, not so much because of COVID, although I think it's been accelerated, and again, I tend to work in the international or the global space, is our questions around deglobalization, particularly, and given the current circumstances in the world with political upheaval, there's a question about how interconnected companies and economies should be, and what are some of the dangers of that? What are some of the risks? And I think there's going to be a great deal more research about the implications of this from a supply chain standpoint. We saw some early glimpses of that when with the Japanese tsunami and disaster in 2011. Where a small region of Japan suddenly had a global impact on automotive supply chains. Well, now we're seeing that in a much larger scale. I think that will be significant. And a third one, I think, is more generally the impact of political risk, and not just domestic, and not just internationally, but even domestically. I mean, the recent trucker strike in Canada. Points to the challenge that companies have, organizations have, for trying to anticipate and then manage around such risks. Certainly, things going on in China. I have colleagues who have begun to raise questions about what sorts of exit strategies do companies have when they go into countries. Those were questions that used to get asked in the 1970s. When things were very different, and it's interesting to see those questions coming back to the fore.
Very interesting. And this war-like situation, COVID conditions, so many challenges are being posed in front of organizations and workforce. My next question to you is around the research scholars. So a lot of potential students are looking research as a career option now. It's lucrative, it's very attractive. What 3 tips you would like to give to them? How should they prepare? What kind of life as a scholar they are going to lead? So what kind of 3 tips you are going to give to them?
Sure. I will give 2 tips of my own, and 1 tip that I was given as I entered a doctoral program, as I made that decision. And the first tip that I would say is to make sure you get a realistic job preview. Know what to expect. I think as I've worked with doctoral students, quite often they I won't say they're unrealistic. I would say they're not well formed ideas of what kind of life they are entering into, and some of that has to do with the nature, kind of the day-to-day nature of the work, but also it has to do with the nature of what it means to be a scholar, and certainly I and most of my colleagues would blanch at the thought of being called scholars, certainly early in our careers. That is the path that the doctoral students set out on, and most have not fully evaluated what that means. I think the second tip I would give that came as advice from a friend was to treat my doctoral studies as a job, to put in the necessary time just as I would if I were employed somewhere else doing something, that I was not in school, I was not working towards a job, that I was essentially now fully employed. And I found that if I put in the hours and if I was disciplined in how I put in those hours, so often certainly as undergraduate students and sometimes as graduate students, we say, well, I have classes and then the rest is free time. And his advice was, no, you treat it like you're working 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, and you'll accomplish much more. The third piece of advice I would say is to take responsibility for for what happens to you. Again, as students, and particularly coming through like a graduate program, you're used to somebody else dictating what your course of study will be, or saying, here are the hoops that you have to jump through, or the, steps you have to take. Doctoral programs, certainly my experience and the ones I've worked in, are much more about students deciding what they're interested in and pursuing that and going after that. I found doctoral students who kind of wait for other people to tell them what to do struggle in programs and usually take much longer to get through. If you're not clear about where you want to go, then I would say work to get clear about what you want to do.
Very interesting points, Professor Allan Bird, you mentioned about. I particularly liked the second point, which was around treat this research career or research program as your job. Then only you will be able to contribute more in a disciplined way and in a very effective, productive way. GIM's program is PhD program is very young, so it's just 2 years old. So, what particular those things which you like the most? So maybe 2-3 points which you would like to share with the potential PhD students that they are going to find at the institute when they join the program.
Yeah, one of the things I've enjoyed about the program, I've taught one doctoral course since I've arrived here, is I really like the camaraderie among the students. My approach to doctoral seminars is to treat them and very much as a Socratic approach, or to take that approach. So in my course, students have lots of readings, and then one or two of the students are assigned to take the lead. I come into the class kind of taking a back seat to them, and it's up to them to have this conversation, to wrestle with these ideas, to explore these topics, and I will step in on occasion and gently move a conversation in a particular direction, or ask some questions myself that I hope will spur. But I really enjoy the opportunity that the students have to interact with one another, to debate and to wrestle with these ideas. And I think that's a real plus in the program. I know other programs where the doctoral courses kind of continue lectures, different, kind of different content, but still just lectures. But to me, the scholarly life is one of a constant wrestle with ideas and with concepts, and you learn how to do that by doing it, and that's what we do here in the program. I think the other thing I like about the program is, while there's that latitude, there's also a clear path. One of the other challenges with doctoral programs is sometimes there aren't mileposts, there aren't benchmarks that have to be met in order to move in, or there aren't timelines for when those have to be. And I've been impressed with the design of this program. And as I've had a chance beyond the doctoral course to work, I'm currently working with one student on a research project. I'm really impressed with how prepared she has been for the work that we're doing.
Okay, nice. Very nice. So I'm very hopeful that a lot of new students are going to join in and work with you, learn from you. Your experience from different cultures and nations are definitely an asset to GIM, and as well as coming students, future students are definitely going to learn from you a lot. Thank you so much, Professor Bird, and I'm very happy that you interacted and shared your thoughts and experiences with GIM, and also all across the world, wherever you worked. You brought a lot of experience to GIM and PhD students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all here. Thank you for watching our work. If you have not subscribed to Inkpot Hub Media, then please hit the bell icon and subscribe to our channel and support research celebrations in India.
Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.